Everybody, I want to, oh, thank you, Kathy. Anyway, good morning and happy Tuesday. Hopefully everybody's doing well. It's good to see many of you. I think today's program is kind of interesting and also ironic that we are doing this on Zoom. And I'll share my personal experiences since COVID with remote work. But I've been on a mission ever since COVID, talking to so many of our members. And the one thing I like about our association is we represent so many different companies in so many different sectors, right? So it's kind of interesting to hear how healthcare, right? A lot of them have been on the front line since day one. There's really not a lot of remote work they can do, whether that's true of manufacturers, excavators, construction. And then you have attorneys, bankers, accountants, and environmental folks that, were able to let their employees work remote. And it's been interesting. I'll share with you that it's been a journey, but the purpose of today's program, and we have five great speakers, is we want to keep this very conversational and very informal. We want to hear from all of you too, if you have a perspective or if your company or firm is bringing about a best practice. That's really what this is about, right? Kind of hearing what's going on in the world with remote work, the challenges, the benefits, and we're going to get into the details, but I want to thank our sponsor today, Sharp. So I think Susan, I'm not sure if Susan's on already, but she's also a member of our steering committee. So I'm going to do a quick introductions of our speakers, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the stage. Oh, hi, Susan. How are you? Thanks for sponsoring. And then we're going to hear really briefly from all of our speakers their 30,000 foot level view of remote work. And then we're going to get into the details, right, and share some thoughts. But so it's my pleasure to introduce Beverly Williams, who's the Chief Human Resources Officer and Chief Diversity Officer for Langen Engineering and Environmental Services. Beverly, thanks for being here. One of our steering committee members as well, HR professional. She's joined by Ali Corio, who's currently the Chief People Officer at Wilkin Gunton Plan, also an accounting firm. So Ali, thank you for being here. And then we have Andrew Zizas, which is interesting because he's the real estate person, but also Andrew is also the CEO of Real Estate Strategies Corporation, and he's going to talk about the impact on real estate, but also share his thoughts and views on remote work for his colleagues. And then we have three attorneys, which we're fortunate to have, and I'll start with David Nachman, who runs NPZ Law. I know David, it's a pleasure to have you give your perspective as not only an attorney, but also an employer. Alex Rubin, I mean, many of you know Alex Rubin. She's spoken to our group before. She represents both employees, employers, and she also has her own law firm. Alex, good to see you. And then finally, Heather Bosak from Fox Rothschild. Heather, it's good to see you and being here. So for our panelists, and again, keep it very top level. And I should take a step back. My thoughts are this, and again, this is feedback for everybody. This year, and it's kind of interesting, when 2023 came around and it started with our banks, a lot of the folks started bringing people back 3, 4, 5 days a week, right? And I'm starting to see that with a lot of our companies. I think remote work is here to stay. I think the flexibility, right? Before COVID, I needed to work from home. Maybe somebody had a laptop or somebody had a desktop set up at home and they would VPN into the office. Now, clearly, it's part of the fabric, the culture of work. It's a question now of, I don't think the market, if you will, has kind of settled down in terms of what does this look like? What does it mean to businesses? Is it 3 days a week, 4 days a week? When do people come in and all the issues? So I think it's here to stay. I can't imagine that we're ever going to go back to a situation where if you're able to, depending on your industry, where you're not working hybrid. And I'll share with, just for our own staff, that we all work remote. I come in every day because I choose to come in. I was out on the road, but everybody comes in when we have an event the next day, and it's been working out well, right? I mean, we get on Zoom, we get on Teams, and we talk to each other. So with that, I'm going to start with the ladies, and I'll start with you, Beverly. Just your general thoughts on remote work.
Okay, thank you, Tony, and good morning, everyone. At Langen, we have hybrid work schedules, so it's firm-wide. It's for all employees. They choose the days in which they want to come into the office. There are a few employees that don't come in at all, their choice, and then we have field workers too that are always out in the field. but basically all employees are eligible. We set them up to work at home. So we did this since COVID, where we gave everybody laptops for their home, 2 large monitors, keyboard, mouse, everything that you need to be functional. And then we also started a program, it's called an office space program, where we reimburse employees up to $500 for them to buy extras. They might want a new chair, they might want a lamp, shelves, whatever, as long as it's office related. The only requirements that we do have on our hybrid work schedules is for new hires. So when we hire someone new, we really want them to have the ability to learn their role, acclimate to our culture, all those sort of things. So we say for entry level, fresh out of school, that they must be in the office minimum 3 days a week for the first 2 years of employment, because they're learning about business too. They really need to have that face-to-face interaction. And then for seasoned hires, people with experience, we say minimum 3 days a week, but just for the first 6 months so they can learn our culture. But that's very top line, Tony. I know we'll go into more details later.
Yeah, thank you, Beverly. Allie, I'll share your thoughts.
Yes, thanks, Tony. Good morning, everyone. So we're Wilkin Gunn Plan. So we're a CPA firm. We're headquartered in East Brunswick, New Jersey. Currently, we actually have no mandates for any return to the office. So a lot of our employees are still fully virtual. We really embraced this as part of the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, we had the remote flexibility options available. But it was flipped. The majority of people were in the office and some people were working occasionally from home. Now it's the complete opposite, where the majority are working virtually. And we have people that come into the office based on what they choose to do. So we instituted our unlimited work options policy, where people can decide whether or not they want to come into the office. That includes any new hire, so including our entry levels. Of course, when they come on board, we let them know that there may need to be a in-person training. So we do have that set up so that they can come in. If they are out of state, then we would fly them in for those opportunities to make connections with our staff, because again, culture is also very important to us as well, but also to have that FaceTime and that formal training in person to start. But other than that, we don't have any minimum day requirement for individuals to be in the office. We're more intentional about how we want to have people come into the office. So if it's for connections or team building, we set it up that way. If it's for training, it's set up for that purpose. If we have events, we strategically plan events throughout the year so that we can have those touch points for everyone and for different departments, things like that. So we do have that fully virtual option. We do the same as Beverly mentioned, where we have everyone set up to be successful from home. So for all new hires, they get whatever setup they need, up to, I believe now it's up to 3 or 4 monitors, all from the firm. So it's at no extra cost for the employees. Anything that is helpful for them to be set up. So technology is obviously really important so people can work. So that's something that we invest in a lot here as well.
Thank you, Allie. Andrew. Oh, you're on mute, Andrew.
It's always a good idea to have the mute off when you start talking. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here, Tony and panelists. Thanks for having me. Good morning, everyone who's attending. The word I would use for the real estate world as it relates to its effects, having been affected by remote work, is tumultuous. The nature of office space has changed for a very long time. I never use the words forever, but for a very long time. Occupants are shedding space. They're consolidating. Surprise, surprise. They recognize that they need overall less office space. They're considering alternative designs, alternative means of attracting employees into the office. Most of the executives, primarily CFOs with whom I communicate, want to bring their employees back into the office full-time, but recognize that that's not likely going to happen, at least in the near term. Most are telling me that they're getting employees back 3 and 4 days a week. Really tough to get them back on Fridays for a full 5-day, unless it's the nature of that business, but the vast majority of companies are not. Many executives are confused in that they saw what happened in the pandemic. They understand the desire on the part of a lot of employees to work remote, either full-time or part-time. Yet the economy is changing, the employment profile is changing. More people are willing to come back to the office more often, and employers are hesitant as to where they should invest capital in order to create the kind of environments that would attract for 3 days, for 4 days, or 5 days. They are willing to be flexible, but they're asking themselves, do we invest? Do we invest now? Are we going to change in a different direction? A lot of executives are just not sure which direction to go in as it relates to facilities and real estate transactions that will attract and retain high caliber employees. From the landlord side, it's tumultuous as well. A lot of landlords are nervous because of the decreased need for office space on the part of office occupants. Vacancies in many major markets are skyrocketing without an expectation that they're going to return. We've seen very large transactions in urban and suburban markets, but when you look behind those transactions, you realize that although they may have been large, they were smaller than where those occupants came from originally. So there's almost a wholesale shedding of office space by corporate occupants. That's making it difficult for landlords. There are growing vacancies, declining valuations. A lot of landlords are looking to sell or redevelop their office properties into alternate uses in the suburbs, retail, residential, warehouses, hospitality. In urban markets, they're very often looking at taking side street buildings and converting them to hospitality or apartments. So tumult on both the occupant and the landlord side, but when there's chaos, there's opportunity. Thanks, Tony.
Well said, Andrew. Thank you. David.
Tony, good morning. So everyone, thank you so much for attending. What I can say is we sort of didn't really hit any bumps in the road during the pandemic because we didn't have a choice other than to be remote. Our work is worldwide. We're 35 people scattered among 4 offices on the Eastern Seaboard, and that's how we communicate. And when we hit the pandemic, we were already remote. So everything worked out very nicely for us. We just sort of transitioned to what we were doing normally. I agree 150% with Ali, who said that getting to know the corporate culture is so important and having people in the office. We do have if we have an ask of a new potential employee, we like to have them in the office for at least 6 months so they get to know our style. Of course, most people don't want to know my style, but when the opportunity presents itself, we want to sort of slowly integrate them, get to know the folks they're going to be working with face to face, and then put them out where demographically it works best for them. Obviously, the HR angle on this is keep the employees happy and you will keep the employees. That is the key. So I'm actually, I want to talk about later on, Tony, as I mentioned to you, and I want to talk a little bit about remote verification and the new I-9 rules for everyone, and we can get into the weeds later on that.
Thank you, David. Alex.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Tony and Commerce and Industry, for hosting this. Happy to be here. So during the pandemic, I only had one employee, and she was my assistant, legal assistant, legal secretary. She had to go home. Obviously, we worked from home for 5 months, and then we came back to the office, and then I hired more employees, and for a while, everybody was in the office full time. I now have an associate attorney who requested to work 2 days remotely. And I think for in my firm, for attorneys and paralegals, I'm fine with that. On occasion, my paralegal will work remotely as well, but that's really only if she needs to be home for other reasons, and then she will work as well instead of having to take a day off. And again, we track paralegals, we track hours. So that's also an issue. Wage and hour is a big issue with working remotely for non-exempt employees. But currently I have 4 employees, and one is completely remote because she was hired that way. She lives in South Africa. So obviously she's remote 100% of the time. And my associate attorney is in the office 3 days a week. Although for the first 3 months, I requested that she, and she was fine with that she be in the office full time while she was learning the office, learning how we do things, training, and so on. And like I said, for my legal assistant, she needs to be in the office 100% of the time. So that's how I work it. I'm a small law firm, you know, so that is a little different from larger companies. But again, we'll get more into the weeds about other issues. Policies are important to have on remote work. You know, you want to cover monitoring, accommodations. Jurisdiction becomes a legal issue, which we can talk about later. And like I said before, wage and hour.
Thank you, Alex. And finally, Heather.
Hi, thank you so much, everyone, for attending and for putting on this presentation. So I work for one of those big law firms, as opposed to what Alex was describing. I mean, we have 1,000 attorneys, 29 offices all over the country. We don't have a firm rule. Our rule is it should be your primary workspace. And I think that sort of translates to people are expected to be in 3 days a week. There's a lot more flexibility, I would say, for attorneys. I mean, our staff is actually, our legal assistants do work hybrid. They're here 2 to 3 days a week. And it's really focused on the business need. Like, what does your business need? If we need somebody in the office, they're required to come in. If they can do their work remotely, then if that works out, that works out. But I do think there's a trend among companies to be bringing people back. I think, as Beverly and Allie talked about, culture is a big thing. People are feeling very, you know, separated. I mean, this is an issue, you know, not just a legal issue or a remote issue, just people in general are feeling separated. You know, we have the attorney, you know, general talking about loneliness. You know, there's a lot of issues, and that's causing a disconnect with people for work, which is then causing other issues. If people aren't connected with their workplace, they're having, you know, you're having more turnover, you're having other issues going on. Alex talked about monitoring. I mean, some of the issues with monitoring, some people are having second jobs while they're working remotely, you know, which creates a lot of different issues with remote. But on the flip side, I think a lot of employers have found some benefits of being able to have transitioned to a remote, because they're able to hire people from greater places. I mean, Alex, I guess, is an example, having someone from South Africa, but people have increased where they're recruiting from. They're not just looking at the people who are right next door who can come into the office, but they're hiring from all over the country, which, of course, from a legal perspective, which is, you know, what I'm here to talk about, presents all different issues. You know, with jurisdictions have different rules, what law applies, you know, what are the rules in this state versus that state. So it's been interesting to be an employment lawyer during these times.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. So a good segue, and then again, we can kind of get into the details, but let's start with the policies and the legal implications, right? I think we all have, hopefully we all have an employee manual that has policies, but let me throw a couple of conversation points out there. One is the work hours, right? People have told me that the work hours kind of blew up. You know, growing up, I always remember it was 9 to 5, right? It was depending on, again, your industry. It was 9 to 5. And then it seems like now that everybody's remote, people are getting onto their emails early in the day. People are staying on late. So this is to all the panelists in terms of, let's just start with work hours. Are you strict on work hours if you work from home, or is it up more or less flexible? So who wants to take that one first?
I can take it, Tony.
Okay.
That's okay. All right. Okay. So at Langen, and Langen is an engineering and environmental services firm, 40 offices, a little over 1,600 employees. So there's a lot of employees in a lot of different time zones. Some are out of the country too, but we're flexible. So we do mention core hours, but employees can flex their hours as long as it's okay with their supervisor and as long as they're doing it consistently, so that we know when they're working and when they're not working, and that they don't change it every day, so they're a moving target. Something else that we've done, because we've noticed with this flexibility that we have, when employees are sending emails internally, they'd be coming at all hours of the day, which is not a good thing, especially if it's a supervisor sending out an email to an employee and it's, let's say, 9 o'clock at night. It creates stress for the employee to receive it if they happen to see it. So we created another policy, a lighter one, but we call it the no-fly zone. And this policy states that internally, employees can't send emails starting at 6 p.m. at night, their own time, within their time zone, all the way through 8 o'clock in the morning of their time zone. So that stopped a lot of the unnecessary email traffic that can just wait to basic core hours.
Thank you. Richard, you have your hand up, and then we'll go to the other panelists. Richard?
Yes. Again, I work with Ames International, which is a global executive recruitment firm. And my whole life, I've worked in companies that are internationally focused. What I can say is certainly you can get a lot. And as far as my personal contacts, I, of course, will use Zoom and I'll use phone call. I call the Middle East, the Far East, so the times change, but I don't have to stay up from 6 in the morning to 12 at night every night. I just make a couple of calls. What I will say about the virtual, you can get a lot done for sure. I also like to be in an office to see people personally, because you can first of all see a number of people at one time, and you can see their expressions better than when you're doing a Zoom call. And the executive recruitment company, we have global meetings, usually at least once a year. So you meet everybody, you meet a lot of people at one location. And that's very, very, very helpful. It's one thing to meet people in person and be able to, again, to judge their full expressions. That's invaluable. And of course, home, it depends on what sort of, I'm here alone, so I don't get a lot of interruptions. But if you have children and so forth, it depends on how well you can accommodate it. And as well, going to the office depends on what sort of commute you have. It's one thing for 20 minutes. I used to go to New York City, and that could take an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on traffic. And that's a waste of time commuting in many cases.
Thank you, Richard. Going back to the work hours, let me just share an anecdote, which I thought was interesting. This was about a year ago. I'm having breakfast with one of our manufacturer members. He couldn't get in touch with his vendor, supply vendor. Finally, it was like 2 weeks. He gets in touch. It was like the vendor calls him back, or he calls him at around 10:30 in the morning, right? Thinking that he was in the office or working. And, he's like, look, I need my materials. And the response he got was, well, I'm walking my dog now. Can I call you back in a half an hour? And he was just done at that point. So that goes back to the work hours, right? In Beverly, it's kind of interesting with the no-fly zone, and that's kind of interesting. That definitely helps alleviate some of that. But any other thoughts from our panelists on the work hours and how you handle that?
I think it depends on the position, right? So, like, again, in my firm, attorneys, we get emails, all the time, right? Day and night. And I don't require, my attorney to answer emails in the middle of the night or anything like that, or after hours. But, sometimes we do work after hours. That's a known fact that attorneys tend to do that. But, and again, that's an exempt employee. An employee, you don't have to worry about wage and hour issues because they get paid a set salary. They're, a professional employee. Hourly employees, it's different. And that's where the wage and hour laws come in. And you really want to make sure you're tracking your employees' time. So even if you are going to be flexible about the hours that they work, you need to track all the hours that they work and pay them for all the hours that they work, and time and a half if it's over 40 in any given week. So that can become an issue when employees are working excessive hours. I think there's the flip side is, are they working enough hours when they're working remotely? And then that comes down to monitoring. But in terms of time difference hours, so I work, as I mentioned, my marketing assistant is in South Africa. And yet the deal was, when I hired her, that she would work hour 9 to 5 Eastern time. And she's fine with that. On occasion, we have to adjust that because South Africa has power outage problems, and sometimes her power is not is functioning later in the evening or late at night there. So and then we're able to adjust it again because of the nature of her job. She doesn't have to be available. She doesn't work with my clients. So, but we need to be, my staff, like my paralegal, for example, works 8 to 4. Everybody else is pretty much basically 9 to 5 and then some for the attorneys.
Just to piggyback on what Alex is saying, when you're non-exempt employees, it's really, important to put some rules and restrictions on when they can work and when they can't work, and so it comes back to, as I think employment lawyers always say, you need a policy on that, and then you need to consistently enforce your policy, because if you're letting people work without any control, then they can run up all those hours. You have overtime, and even if you didn't tell them they can work overtime and they work it, you have to pay it. And then the way the employer has to deal with that is you're putting restrictions on when, and then if they don't follow your policy, then you can discipline. But they work, they have to be paid. I think some of the working hour issues is also important on what role you serve. If you're a client service professional, you need to be working when your clients need you. As the example you gave, Tony, I mean, your clients don't want to, maybe you like to work starting at 1 o'clock and you work to the middle of the night, but that's not when your people you need to be in touch with work, and that doesn't work.
In the interest of continuing that colloquy, can I just maybe piggyback off of what Alex and Heather are saying by directing a question to Beverly? And I'm curious to know, if you don't mind sharing, what exactly was the genesis of creating this no-fly policy? Was it something having to do with overtime, that you wanted to sort of put a restriction on, the ability for folks to work beyond certain hours, or was it something different? Was it a corporate culture thing?
Yeah, it was something different, David, and good question. It was it had to do with employees' well-being more than anything else. So with giving this flexible work schedule, there were some people that would take some hours off during the day to do personal pursuits. Let's say for this conversation, from 2 to 4, they weren't working. But then they would take those hours and work them later in the day from maybe 9 to 11, because that's what they preferred. And they were shooting out emails, and you have 1,600 employees. There's a lot of emails going out unnecessarily. And like Alex mentioned, we also work in the evenings too. We serve our clients when we need to and meet our deadlines. But those aren't, firm-wide regulations. We just have, that's between an employee and supervisor in the group from which they work. They make their own, guidelines according to the work that's coming in. And we're a billable organization similar to law firms, and every 15 minutes is billed. So even if you're non-exempt, so we're tracking it to the minute.
Great, thank you.
Time perspective.
Thank you so much.
One other thing, I'll just chime in as an employer. So we're a CPA firm. We do the same. Obviously, we're a billable hours environment, so we do track everything. But Beverly, what you mentioned about employee well-being, we experience a lot of that as well. So we do something similar with the general guidelines of core hours. The main thing that we focus on is, in addition to having policies, as Heather mentioned, and enforcement of those policies, but it's really about the communication. So making sure that you're communicating with your team both up and down, and setting clear expectations. And that's the most important thing to do from the start, so that there can't be any of those misunderstandings, or to limit the amount of misunderstandings that may come up. So that communication is absolutely key. And we use technology to help with that too. So one thing that we do with our firm is, we have about 140 employees. Everyone has full access to everyone's calendar. So we encourage everyone to keep that up to date and keep, their team statuses up to date. So that way, in the event that someone is looking for you, you can just hover over something or check a calendar. But really, it's all about communicating with your team and specifying that availability versus reachability, setting the difference between those two things, where yes, I'm reachable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm actively working at that point in time. So really setting those expectations from the start has been super helpful for our accounting staff and for our exempt staff. The non-exempt absolutely needs a little bit more structure, just because of the wage and hour laws, but they have a ton of flexibility as well. But we just make sure we're, communicative from the start.
Thank you, Allie. So how important is it to actually have a written policy around this? Whether was everybody agreeing? This is a question for everybody on the call. Yeah. I mean, does everybody have written policies around remote work?
It's really important. I just read a statistic that 749 companies that were surveyed last year, only 34% had formal written policies around remote work. And I think that's like astonishing.
And Alex, can I jump in there? Have job descriptions also changed, where they have to put it in a job description?
It should be, it should be in the job description that, you can whatever these are your hours, or these are the core hours you need to follow. And yes, you can work remotely 2 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever it might be.
And what are and this is again for everybody, but what are the obligations for the workstations at home, right? You get a laptop, maybe a cell phone, but what are there any obligations if you now as a company establish a work from home policy? What are their obligations on the employers for the workstation?
I mean, I think that's an individual thing. I don't think there are any, correct me if I'm wrong, Heather or David, but I don't think there's a legal obligation to provide equipment for employees to use at home. But in some cases, I mean, it's to the employer's advantage because you want to maintain confidentiality of company data and the company's customers' data, right? So you want to have some control over the equipment they're using. I mean, I'll just use myself as an example. My paralegal and my associate and myself as well, we all have laptops that we can use at work and take home with us. I actually have both. I have a desktop in the office and then a laptop that I use at home.
The legal obligation depends on state. Some state laws do have requirements that an employer pay for everything that an employee needs to do their job, including in some states portions of their internet bill. But New Jersey doesn't have those. But I do think the issues that Alex just raised, you want to preserve your data and your information. You don't want people logging in from their own personal computers. I mean, there's some people that do that, with the bring your own device issues, as long as you're putting the security on. But I think it's a best practice to supply the main workstation to the employee. So they're
Tony, this also becomes an issue of productivity, not just legal matters. Of course, if I've got an employee and I want my employee to hit a nail with a hammer, it's incumbent upon me to make sure A, he has the nails, B, he has the right hammer, and C, I've trained him how to do both. So if as an employer, I leave it to the employee to obtain the right equipment, they may not be able to obtain the right equipment. They may be mistaken in the equipment they obtain. And at the end of the day, they may not be able to do their job.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's Fran just put a comment in there was science, but Dimitri, you had your hand up.
Just real quick, one of the things we do tech support, and from March 15th, 2020, when they said everybody go home, till now, we learned everything there is to learn about securing people, because it's the Wild West. Everybody just wants to do what they want to do from what device they want, from what internet access. So they'll go to anywhere. We get phone calls. I'm having internet connections. Well, where, are you home or are you at the office? I'm on a plane. I'm 3,000 feet in the air, traveling 500 miles an hour in a metal tube, and my connection's not good. So, but the main thing is, so we learn how to protect everybody in all these situations, and it takes a lot of tools to do that. But the security is really an issue for everybody. It's not just, and I always feel like the conversation is if we're in the Industrial Revolution and our employees are abused and everything. People are like walking their dog, and if they don't want to come into the office to work at their cubicle and they want to work from home, and now you have to deal with everything from a technology perspective from their home. So there's two lists of pros and cons. There's when COVID happened, it brought on a lot of challenges, but it also brought on tons of opportunity. So every complaint that you can have turns into an opportunity to do something about it. But I always, just on a personal level, because I'm 68, so I'm old school, and I always think like these conversations as if the people it's child labor in a factory or something. These people are working in their pajamas at home. They don't come to the office anymore. They had a beautiful, expensive cubicle with the expensive brand furniture that you bought. You're paying rent for the cubicle. You have all the equipment there in the office, and then they go home, and now everyone's worrying about what's going on at the home too.
Yeah.
But that also brings all the opportunity, like hiring people from South Africa, right? So there's always a plus on it, but everybody always leans one way and they don't think about the other. But number one, and I'll shut it down here, is security. You got to make sure that you're secure.
Thank you, Dimitri. Debbie, you have your hand up.
Good morning, and thank you all for your great information here. My question is, I have a graphic design studio, and it's all about communication and collaboration. So when we're working remotely, we have weekly team meetings. We regularly communicate to keep projects going and to exchange ideas. How do you, panelists, what's your perspective on how you're communicating as teams? Are you using Slack? Are you using some other technology? What are you doing?
I'll go with that. Should I go with that, Tony?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, Debbie. Yeah, we use Teams, Microsoft Teams, which is really helpful, but it's not the only thing that we do. We've increased our communication in so many different ways regarding in-person team meetings, regarding using Teams virtually to have virtual meetings. The communication has increased. Even the president and CEO doing a lot more town hall, but virtually meetings, just to get that information to people, in a consistent and frequent manner.
We're very customer service driven. So what we usually do, our receptionist is required to ask the client how they want to communicate, what platform is most comfortable for them. So we offer up, of course, the ones that the lawyers in our office use as options. And then if they come back with something else, then we set it up that way. Mm-hmm. So, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for the clients.
Thank you, David. Andrew, your hand is up.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about clients, because we talk about our clients being our actual clients, our prospects, our suppliers and coworkers. And I believe many of them are suffering right now. If you give evidence to phone answering, auto attendance, with directories by names when you don't know who you're trying to reach out to, and voicemails. The websites, I see the trend of no contact names, no addresses, no phone numbers, and a form to fill out if somebody wants to be contacted. So I don't know if this is a result of the millennials and the Gen Zers coming of age, but I believe in a core staff being in an office 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, or in a regional office with answering phones and communicating. And we have a core group of people here. We do have people that work remotely, but we see the clients suffering out there. And as a supplier, our goal is not to have our clients suffer, but to be readily available in hours that they would expect you to be readily available, and being able to get a hold of people and knowing who they are, what departments they are, and being accessible. So I think a lot of people need to rethink from the perspective of the client and the prospective client.
Thank you, Andrew. Other thoughts on hours, policies? It's interesting, Andrew, because I was in Trenton last week, and I had heard that the Trenton mayor was upset because if you think about the local businesses in Trenton, they need state employees to be back in their offices, and one of the struggles is I think the governor has left it up to each agency. I think the policy is a hybrid work week as well. But to your point about customer service, I have heard that before, where people can't be contacted. You don't even know who to contact and if you get a call back. So it's customer service has taken a hit, but I appreciate your comments. We have about 10, 15 more minutes left, but anything else about work hours, workstations, policies, legal? I assume, Alex and Heather, we haven't seen a lot of court cases around remote work, have we? Workers' comp?
Actually, I'm not sure about workers' comp because I don't really do that, but there was just a case last month in August, Tripp versus Ascentage Pharma Group, where it was the U.S. District Court of New Jersey. The judge ruled that the employee worked in New Jersey for a Maryland company, and I'm quoting from the case. He worked remotely from his home in New Jersey, paid New Jersey taxes, collected New Jersey unemployment and disability benefits, received office equipment from the Maryland company, and he stored business-related documents in his home. And yet the judge ruled that these actions were not particular to New Jersey and could have occurred in any state where he chose to work. So therefore, he sued his company under New Jersey law for discrimination, et cetera. And the court said, no, this case belongs in Maryland. And it got moved to the District Court of Maryland. So again, that's one of the, few cases out there. I've often said you have sometimes it goes the other way. If an employee is working in another remotely for your company, you're in New Jersey and they're working remotely in Idaho, you might have to look at, get an Idaho employment attorney if you have an issue. They might sue you under Idaho law. And again, it also has to do with are you taking advantage of the fact that the employee's in that state to do business in that state? That's a different scenario where the court would probably rule that state's law applies.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before we go to Fran, Alex, you just reminded me about a year or two ago, and I think this came out of New Jersey Department of Labor, where talk about wage and hour issues. An employee in New Jersey is working for a California-based company that had no operations here, and I think they may have been liable for payroll tax. So I don't know. I know we have a lot of accountants on the call today, but I don't know the nuances, and maybe that's a subject matter for another day. But just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Again, I could be wrong with some of the facts, but it was one of those. The employee was in a different state. Are you subject to those payroll taxes? Because to your point, Alex, where would he file unemployment, right? If he got laid off, it wouldn't be California. It would be
usually it's where the employee's working, which state the employee's working in. There's
definitely been some litigation on what taxes you're supposed to be paying.
Yeah,
I think the states have sued each other on that.
Yeah.
It's called the convenience of employer test. It's just come out in New Jersey as well.
Yeah,
not in New York State law and Connecticut law. So it's the convenience of employer rule.
Another area where some lawsuits have been filed are granting accommodations to work from home. Whereas, pre-pandemic, working physically in the office was considered an essential function. With COVID, we saw that people can do a lot of work remotely. And so for employers who want to try to bring employees back or require in-person work when employees are requesting accommodations for disabilities to work remotely, and there's been some litigation when some of those requests have been denied.
Thank you. Fran, you've been patient. Your hand has been up. Then we'll go to Susan.
No worries. I have a little bit of a different perspective because I've been a consultant for most of my career and worked for both the big consulting firms as well as boutique firms, as well as my own firm. So the issue of remote work is like, what? Why is that an issue? I've been working remotely primarily since like 2010. And so I think consulting firms are a reasonable model for professional employees. Now, it doesn't help you with non-exempts, but for professional employees, consulting firms are a decent model to look at for remote work. And the insight that I've gotten in sessions like this, which I go to as often as possible, because I find it really fascinating how industries that are not so accustomed to remote work are handling it. And the insight that I've had is that a requirement for successful remote work on a big scale in organizations is the work itself, the communications, and the relationships need to be more consciously structured, and they need to be consciously kept up to date and nurtured and so on than they had to if I wanted to see Alex and all I had to do was go next door and tap on her door. So I think that's the lesson that particularly we in the US need to learn, because I think we've allowed things that are on a running basis, if you will, an administrative running basis. We've allowed them to get a little too loose as far as communications and keeping relationships and structure to the work and timing and, you know, all those good project related things are concerned. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Fran. Susan.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to just go back to the convenience of employer tax rule. Can one of you just give us kind of the details on the New York, New Jersey? So somebody who has an office in New Jersey, but may work a few hybrid days at home from a home in New York.
Oh, Leo, you're on mute, Leo.
Sorry. If you have an office in New York and you're working in New Jersey, New York State could say you're still a New York employee and subject to New York State tax. And the vice versa is true in New Jersey. Just recently, the governor signed legislation about that.
So full New Jersey tax, regardless of whether you work from a home office in New York.
Just based on the days worked.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Leo.
Thank you.
All right, with the 10 minutes that we have left, I mean, we haven't really talked about, I mean, onboarding or, you know, hiring. It seems like, again, I mean, we're doing it too whenever, it seems like everybody probably does a Zoom call before they bring them in. I don't know. I heard today that, you know, new employees, you want them in the office as often as they can just to understand the culture. But, you know, for the younger professionals, is there anything that, you know, anybody wants to talk about, best practice? Do they come in more often? How do you mentor them? Is anybody seeing that, trying to track growth, professional development? Peter, I know you were going to speak about this, Peter. Thank you.
Yeah, I had my hand up, but it's brown, so you couldn't see. Yeah, I think what we're finding, you know, in the beginning, we were using remote and virtual working as an attraction feature, right? Especially for the earlier career entrance to our company. What I'm finding now is that we have more of the early career folks that are eager to come into the office and learn and communicate and collaborate. And whereas in the beginning of COVID, a lot of your mid to late career professionals were kind of butting up against the remote work, it's harder for them to get them to come back in. And we need them back in so that they can literally train and teach and collaborate with our early career folks towards succession planning. And that's, I think, right now, it's really a nice buzzy thing to have. But when you're a professional services firm, who's going to actually succeed the folks who actually have the client relationships, the depth of knowledge of the firm? So this is something that we're trying to contend with now, and while also engaging the early careers and keeping them active within the firm.
Thank you, Peter. Andrew?
Yeah, Tony, supporting some of the comments that both Peter and Fran made. One of the things that we've lost, one of the most important things that we've lost by going remote, is that 30-second bump and run, the ability to transfer a critical bit of information in 30 seconds and then move on and create magic. You know, Tony, if you and I are working in the same office and we were actually in the office, after a while, we'd probably establish a rapport where I could knock on your door, stick my head in and say, I know you're busy. I need you to answer one question. Is it green or is it blue? And you think and you say it's blue. Thank you. That's all I need. And I close the door and walk down the hall and make magic with the information that you transfer to me. And we've missed that. And you can't replicate that remotely or by cell phone or otherwise. And training and learning and innovation and growth and enhancing employee performance and productivity doesn't only come in formal training sessions that you can either sit in the classroom or attend by video. It comes in those interactions, those innovative, creative water cooler interactions that occur best when people are literally bumping into each other. And a lot of employers are talking to us at Real Estate Strategies Corporation about how to structure transactions that can be flexible to accommodate growth and contraction, and how they can cooperate and collaborate with their architectural firm to design environments that will actually attract, promote, and retain quality employees, because that becomes the key. One of the complaints I keep hearing about employees is, I can make Zoom calls from home, but I'm now required to drive 45 minutes into my office to make Zoom calls with the guy who's sitting next to me in the next cube. So there's also a learning and an education and an elevation of how the office environment is going to work, both in the office and remotely. And one of the most important keys will be to impress upon younger employees that actual face-to-face time really is valuable and productive to their ability to produce for the company and grow their own careers.
You know what, Andrew? I've never seen so many heads nod yes when you hit on that point. So point well taken. And I'm going to go to Kalita, Beverly, and then Merrill. I know you want to get in. So Kalita, thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks, Tony. And thank you to everyone that's here today. It's really my first meeting with CIANJ, and it's been a very informational and helpful for me. I've been with Saks for about 4 years now, and Saks is also an accounting firm, public firm, offering tax, accounting, advisory, consulting, and other services as well. And we face the same struggles that everyone here has raised, and more specifically what Andrew just hit on with how do you keep your remote folks engaged? They're not sitting with everyone, and a lot of them are starting remote, so they've never actually sat in an office with the people they're working with. So it's a challenge that we have. We are hiring throughout the country, so it is an issue, a real issue for us. And what we ended up doing, a colleague of mine and myself, we brainstormed and came up with what has now become our remote committee. And so we have about 30 to 40 people actually that sit fully remote outside of the New Jersey office. And we meet on a regular basis. So we're having quarterly meetings, and we're inviting 2 to 3 partners at a time to these meetings so that our younger people, our newer people, our remote people are able to get that face-to-face interaction. We say we're trying to mimic the water cooler type conversations. That's what we're trying to foster, but it is challenging. But it is one thing that we think it's working, it's helping. And we've also started to incorporate not just these quarterly meetings, but things like weekly coffee breaks where we would all kind of just hop on a Teams call together and just take a break from working and just chit chat a bit. We're also trying to have hourly remote sessions on Fridays. So if you're a remote person and you just need that interaction with other people as you're working. So we're trying to foster that conference room type environment where if we were all to be sitting in a conference room and still attacking our work, that's kind of what we're trying to provide to our remote.
Yeah, thank you, Kalita. Great information. Beverly.
Yeah, also regarding what Kalita said, and also Andrew and Peter, yeah, the value of FaceTime is incredible, and I think we've never realized it more than now. And so we at Langen, I mean, we're increasing our learning and development opportunities, expanding our blended training program. But something that I found interesting is what I want to mention. Langen has always had a really successful mentoring program over the decades. But since COVID, it's doubled in size. And it's the mentees, the younger generations really having that thirst and that focus on wanting more input from others to help develop their career and advance them, in the industry. So we went from, it's a voluntary program, and each year there's about 250 in total employees participating, which is quite high for a voluntary program. Now it's well over 400. So I found that really interesting on people realizing their own needs and taking action to fulfill those needs.
Thank you, Beverly. Merrill, this is your first event, right, with CIANJ, so welcome, and you want to introduce yourself?
Yes,
yeah.
I'm Merrill Rosenthal. I run for a human capital firm out of Bergen County that helps organizations become flexible. And I did this 18 years ago, and now it's here. So it's a blessing, and I'm grateful to have that. The comment I wanted to make is just to loop all the great comments I heard before, which is, you know, right now, what we're seeing is that, and Beverly, you just said it, that leaders and learning and development are a big deal right now, empowering managers to create experiences of intention. So when people come in the office, they are not Zooming, they're learning, they're connecting, they're socializing, they're being mentored, they're being rotated into different departments. Young people in particular want to be in, but they want it to be a rich experience. So it puts the onus on, I think, the leader to create team agreements, communication opportunities, learning opportunities, so that the office becomes a destination. I think it's an exciting time to reinvent the workplace, but it's not a muscle that everyone necessarily knows how to work. So there's some great work to be done, and I think it's an exciting time to remind everyone why we have organizations and why they're places to be.
Thank you, Meryl. Well said. We got 2 more minutes left. I want to stick to our time because I know some of us have 10 o'clock meetings, but Susan, as our sponsor, and I can't thank you enough, and we're proud of the fact here at CIANJ that since COVID, we've kept all of our virtual events free to members, and it's through the support of our sponsors. So Susan, do you want to say anything about Sharp, or I think it's a brand name everybody knows.
Yeah, hopefully. Just keep in mind, yeah, we're not just on the appliance and TV side, but we have a whole suite of office products. So for all of your people at home that need laptops and additional monitors, you know, please come here. Actually, we have nice ones that can go on the walls in your offices. So yeah, full business suite of products. That's us as well. We are here in New Jersey. I'm in Montvale right now in the office. We just went back to being in 4 days a week after Labor Day. It's been a little bit of a struggle. I get a lot of comments around the coffee area in the morning, like, oh, it's Monday and I'm here and it's raining. Wouldn't it be nice to be home and in my pajamas? But we'll see. People are hopefully getting used to it. Friday, I can't imagine ever getting back to people in the office on Friday. I think we'd have to close the building down. There would be so much kicking and screaming. But we'll see how the 4 days is going. So far so good.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And again, it's 10 o'clock. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank all of you for spending time. And we'll see you at the next event, whether it's in person or virtual. So stay safe, everybody. And again, this was recorded, so we're going to send this out to everybody. So thank you and stay safe. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. It's a
Thank
pleasure.
you.